All right, button pressing has commenced. The time space between us, between me sitting here recording and you listening, has been bridged. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How's it going? Who are you? Are you new? Welcome. Have you been here before? Welcome back. Appreciate whoever you are. I am wondering, as I sit here this day, I'm wondering, is anyone who is listening to this feel as though their life has gone back to normal? I know that's a loaded question, but I look around and it seems like there's other people whose lives have returned to some kind of normalcy and they seem to be feeling good about stuff. I have just been in such a high level of crisis. Those of you who've been around, you know, I'm going through a lot, and it continues to be so up and down. I remember when stuff first started happening with my daughter, and I was talking about it on the show. I said, I think it's going to be some rough waters. Well, I had no idea how rough those waters could get, my friends. And I suppose if you are someone who feels like things are going well for you right now, I don't mean to make you feel shitty about that. That's a beautiful thing. I would humbly suggest that you count those blessings and hold them dear. But if you're more like me and everything still feels pretty messed up on whatever levels it might feel messed up for you, and you're looking around and thinking, am I the only one? Is everybody okay but me? I feel like I want to say, no, you're not the only one. And you know, it makes me laugh. Years ago, early on in this show, someone told me that I reminded them of Christian Slater in that movie Pump Up the Volume. Do I have any Gen Xers in the house? Are there any Gen Xers in the house who remember Christian Slater in Pump Up the Volume with his pirate radio station? I feel like that today. I feel a little bit like I'm up here, my pirate radio cast spouting off. If you don't know what that is, you can go look it up. You'll see it for yourself. Go to YouTube, look up Pump Up the Volume, Christian Slater. Watch the trailer. You'll see what I mean. I'm just having fun. I'm trying to have fun, y'all. I had a horrible day yesterday, and today has gone much better, and I'm appreciating that, and I'm taking that in, and I'm trying to let it come into this intro that I'm doing with you right now. And I will say that one of the big things that I've been talking about off air and exploring in my own practice is how my use of practice forms is serving me. And for a lot of years, I think that I used the asana practice as a way of gaining something that might have been at some point the ability to do the poses better than anyone else in the room, or to the teacher's approval, or at some point I think it was knowing lots of different ways of doing the poses as opposed to one right way. You know, at the beginning it was all about the correct alignment, and then it was like all the different things you could do with the poses. And now I really feel that the use of the forms is much more specific and has very little to do with the forms. That the forms are only there as containers for something else to occur. And that's changed the way that I engage forms and the way I think of them. And really it is this idea of practice being more as like a ritual rather than tools that we utilize. And I've been calling them tools. I used to say, this is my bag of tools that I'm going to teach you. When I was doing my teacher training, it was all about sharing my bag of tools. And it is partly about that. I'm absolutely doing that in the teacher training I'm doing right now. I'm sharing all the tools that I utilize. But more and more, I'm recognizing that the poses or the practice session or the yoga class, it's not about accomplishing forms. It's about the repetition of engaging forms and the intention around that and all the things that might happen as a natural outcropping of the engagement of the forms. And I've just been interested in finding ways to talk about that and seeing if I could get more clear about how I share in that with others even. And it just so happens that my guest today, Nick Beem, has been thinking about a lot of the same things. And a friend of mine, Barbara, shout out to you, Barbara, she sent me a link to Nick's Substack, where he had this piece called Yoga as Ritual, and it was all about what I was just talking about, which is a lot of what I've been talking about. So I reached out to him, and we had a fantastic conversation about this and some other stuff, and I really enjoyed being able to feel the common thread that I think a lot of people are on, not just me and Nick, because it feels where things are more vibrant. You know, if you were here last week, we were talking about politics, where things don't always feel very vibrant. They feel very stagnant. So finding the areas of inquiry where things feel vibrant and possible is, I think, essential. And again, it was just a great pleasure to engage it with Nick, and I'm very happy to be in a position to share it with you today. Real quick, before we get to that, I do want to make a point of expressing gratitude to our podcast premium subscribers. Today, I specifically want to shout out Jennifer Kurdilla and Shahaf Eshel Zamir. Jennifer, friend of the show. Shahaf, longtime supporter. Thanks to both of you. Really appreciate you. And if you're someone who's been listening to this show and you appreciate what you hear on the show, you feel like you get something from listening to it, and you want to get access to the full archives, if you haven't listened to the old episodes, there's lots of great stuff in there. Or maybe you just want to show support for the show. The way that you do it is you become a podcast premium subscriber. It's choose your rate, canceled anytime. If you don't have any money, all you have to do is email us and we give you a free account. But if you have a little something to give, it makes a difference, and we're grateful. To learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, or find out about any of my stuff, my ongoing classes, the training I've been mentioning, all the stuff that I do, you can find it at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think that's it. I think I will touch base with you on the other side, but for now, let's get into this and listen to this conversation that I had with Nick Beem. Hello?
Hey, Jay.
Hi, Nick. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally found this moment. I'm already recording. I'd like to consider us having just begun, if that's okay with you.
That's good with me.
Cool. I'm glad to have this chance to talk with you. And, you know, I feel like I've been reading some of the things that you wrote earlier this year, and I feel some kindred spirit with you, which is why I think a friend of mine sent me a link to your stuff. In particular, yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I've been catching up on some of your latest episodes, and I feel the same. Definitely following some parallel paths here, I think.
I don't like to assume or even ask if people have listened, but I'm glad that you did, because it does seem like there's a similar song that we're singing.
Yeah.
In particular, this idea of, not thinking of practice so much as like technology and tools and more as ritual.
Right.
And like what the implications of that are.
Yeah.
Because there's implications,
There sure are. Yeah.
And so I don't know, it's something I've been thinking a lot about that's happened for me in the last 2 years, especially. And I think I see that seems to be something similar for you, some kind of shift. For myself, I've been sort of talking about it or couching it in terms of like devotional aspects, like chanting sometimes seems to be representative of certain aspects of my practice that got downplayed for a long time because it wasn't like what the market seemed to be after as much.
Sure.
But then more recently, when the market's fallen apart in certain ways, or at least changed drastically, I haven't had that pressure on it. And it's just like, well, what actually works for me? What actually is helping me? And when I focused on that, all of these aspects of practice that are more about like what you're writing about ritual were the thing that is most important right now for me. So in any case, that's a little bit of a long-winded, we'll consider it introduction to us coming together. Thank you again for the time. I really do appreciate it. I know we both have families that we juggle.
We are juggling for sure. But yeah, I'm very glad to. I mean, I listen to tons of podcasts and have mainly been a listener, but I have so many ideas when I listen and feel like I'm constantly collecting all these different ideas and influences. So I feel like a neuron who, is like looking forward to being able to like discharge some of that onwards.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I would say, where we part a little bit is I don't geek out as much on science stuff as you do, but I appreciate that you do. And that some of the science stuff you've been geeking out on is like mitochondria and stuff, and like those networks underneath the soil. I just had Sophie Strand on the podcast. We had a conversation about that and about what I've been referring to as animism. And I saw that you even used that word in your writing as well. Yeah. I think you wrote something about us having Paleolithic animistic ancestry.
Right. It's kind of following Joshua Schrey's lead on that one.
Me too. I had him on the show a little while back, and ever since then, I had discovered his podcast before I got him on the show, but I've been participating in his study group too sometimes because... Oh, you have?
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I really appreciate what he's putting out there. So there you go. There's a good connection. I felt the thread in your stuff too. And I guess for me, I don't know a lot about you. I always do like a little bit of whatever research, Google search on people. And I did notice that your earlier training that you were in the ParaYoga community for a while. I also saw that you did Phoenix Rising yoga therapy.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by that. Did you do those two things like simultaneously? Those are like two very different approaches to practice.
You are correct. and it was really cool. Yeah, it was a nice sort of yin and yang experience. They were roughly at the same time that I was going through those. At least it was an intensive period doing the Phoenix Rising training pretty early in my teaching career. And then the ParaYoga was spread out over a little longer time because it's more pieces to it.
I see. And I noticed, and we could talk about this maybe in a bit, that in older bios, you list those things, and in newer bios, you don't necessarily want to identify with those schools, it seems like. And I guess I'm curious, was there one of those schools that you sort of identified with more than the other?
I would say it depended just a bit on what I was actively training in, but I always held both views, I would say. Just broadly, for those who don't know, the Phoenix Rising yoga therapy method came out of the Kripalu tradition, which was actually my original teacher training was at Kripalu. but Michael Lee developed it at Kripalu, blended in a bunch of other sort of human growth movement stuff that was all sort of simmering there in the Kripalu ashram, and developed this very open-ended process that essentially is a format where a practitioner holds really big open space for someone to have an experience of their body by moving their body into passive stretches, a little bit like Thai massage, but not with massage intention. It's more, here's an experience of your hamstring. What do you notice? And just really leaving a lot of room for the body to speak in various ways, and some very simple dialogue to help that process happen. And it can be really profound for the right person. It's like a big portal to a lot of amazing insight coming. So in that way, it's very yin. There's no leading really. I'm not teaching anything. I'm not trying to make something particular happen. And that especially takes some practice to get out of the way and not try to intervene with the techniques. Whereas on the other hand, the ParaYoga work is...
Well, wait a second. Before you go to ParaYoga, I'll jump in for a second and say I did have a conversation with Michael Lee here on the show years and years ago, if people want to go back in the archives. And he did talk about like the genesis of Phoenix Rising, and just from my own personal experience. And I don't know that she listens to this show, but shout out to, I believe her name was Weena Polly. Weena at one point. Yes. Did you know Weena?
Oh, yeah. She was in my same training group, actually.
Oh, okay. Because Weena lived around the corner from me in Brooklyn. She taught at the center some. And at one point, she did like a couple of Phoenix Rising yoga therapy one-to-one sessions with me because I wanted to experience what it was like. And it is a sort of enigmatic approach in a sense, because like you said, it was me, I lead breaths. I say inhale, exhale 1, inhale, exhale 2, so Phoenix Rising, it doesn't have that kind of tight structure. And it seemed more about observation and someone really trying to point someone to their own experience and really doing everything you can as the facilitator to stay out of the way as much as possible.
Essentially, yeah. And it's evolving. I haven't been involved with the organization in a while, but my understanding is Michael Lee is been tuning it in some different ways more recently.
Interesting. But you were about to say that is in some contrast to ParaYoga.
Right. Yeah. So there you have, this sort of modern synthesis of a couple different tantric lineages that's all about technique. I mean, one of the meanings of the word tantra, as I understand it, is technique, something you do. So it was an amazing, experience of being introduced to many different things that you can do with your breath, with your moving your body, focusing your mind in different ways. And it was really beautiful for me for many years. Though at the same time, I always held that in balance with the Phoenix Rising experience of like, wow, you don't need any particular technique necessarily. So it's always been a fruitful dialectic for me, I guess you could say.
Was the ParaYoga stuff presented as like a technology?
Yes, that was one of the words used for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, we have avoided saying Rod Stryker, the name of ParaYoga, probably for good reason. But did you study directly with Rod?
Yes, that was the main way to do it. He offered these like 5-day courses that you would often travel to study with him, and your 40 to 60 other closest friends.
Yeah. And so I don't know, I send you in the email, like, I don't want to have long conversations about fallen teachers, but it does seem like Rod put himself up pretty high, that the school was presented in a way that it had like this idea of lineage and tradition, and it had this like hierarchy of knowledge and power to it. And he was at the top. Would you say that was your experience of it? Yeah, he was the one who had the knowledge. People were coming for him. I mean, he
I think he was and still is honestly trying to bring other people in as teachers, but the whole sort of capitalist model starts to really come into play, where he's the one on the marketing material, and as you said, because the narrative they use is that of lineage. Well, of course, you want the guy with the lineage, so that's him.
The bestower.
So it makes it tough. Yeah, it makes it tough to distribute power, or more pragmatically, for non-Rod Stryker teachers to bring in the same number of students to expensive trainings.
Right. And I wrote down the year 2007 as being when you were like doing training there, I guess.
That's when I started with it, yeah.
Okay, so 2007, was there an official time that you parted ways? Was it after the scandal or whatever?
It was several years before, sort of a natural fading away, particularly because I had children and traveling to somewhere for 5-7 days and to do a yoga retreat just didn't make as much sense. We managed to do it once or twice when our kids were young. My mom came along and watched our son, and it was just him. But then once we had 2 kids, then it's really like you just all hands on deck at home kind of situation.
Yeah. I think I brought my 2 daughters with me to like one yoga festival that I did or something, and it was just like, it wasn't easy a thing to do, and it never happened after that.
It's like you can make it work, but for all the effort.
And it's hard because you have to transition between. It's hard. You got to make a transition from doing your work and teaching, and then like being with your family. And
that's right.
Sometimes you have to set boundaries, and when you bring them along, the boundaries are all gone.
That's right. I mean, which is a very interesting, brings up the questions of like, well, what is this practice for exactly? Am I just trying to like get away from everything by doing this?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to ask you is, 2007 until not that many years ago, did you see that kind of, was there a change in like Rod and ParaYoga from when you first started there to when you left, in the sense that, like you say, and I've talked about on the show many times, when you are a senior teacher or whatever, and there's marketing happening, a lot of times things get standardized in certain ways, or I don't know, things start to change over time as the numbers get bigger. Did you see that with Rod, or do you think there was, or was he always the problem that he was later? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I guess I would say what the change I noticed over time is that he actually seemed to get a little softer and not as focused on the techniques. When I first came in, it was all about kriyas and learning this set of sort of psychedelic internal visualizations you could do and make different things happen. And that was like, you kind of had to practice each one for 40 days if you wanted to be a certified teacher kind of thing. And the emphasis on that, as far as I could tell, really faded away as he developed in his own practice and got much more focused on mantra and sort of surrender and various other less technique-y qualities, which overall I thought, to his credit, he wasn't just stuck in his original teaching method.
I see. So it's interesting to me that you say that, because it seems like there was like a lot of structure to ParaYoga, and there's all these kriyas, and you have to learn them, and there's a right way to do stuff, if I understand it.
Right.
And that's in contrast to like the more open kind of context of like a Phoenix Rising yoga therapy. But you also said that they talked about it like technology. Was that technology for like you were just saying, like trance purposes more? Like, what was it, technology for self-improvement?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
what was...
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I would say it was sort of a blurry message, because in part, I think, because it was several different yoga traditions coming together in him. And then also it's, the ongoing story of these more traditional, like renunciate methods of India being turned into something for householders. That didn't just start with Rod Stryker, but it's been happening, for a century and a half at least. So what is it for? And there's techniques from different eras. I know I listened to your interview with Doug Keller, so he gave a sort of amazing review of all the different things yoga's been about at different times, and you can really see all those different strata of motivation in the set of techniques we learned, I would say. So it wasn't, from all I studied, it was really more like a buffet table he laid out. And it was sort of up to us to decide, well, are you going to go for the Kundalini thing with energy in the spine, or are you going to go more for just mantra and surrender? So it was put before us as, sort of in the spirit of the consumer capitalist buffet, here's all the stuff. Now you, the individual, choose what you're drawn to. He would give you some guidance. You could have an individual consult with him, but even then, he was still generally interested in you practicing and figuring out what made sense for you, what resonated.
It's interesting that you're talking that he, like a lot of other people, like John Friend too, whatever, they brought different things together that combined different traditions. And like you say, that is an interesting dilemma. I've talked with about a bunch of people about when you have people who don't live in the world trying to teach people who do live in the world how to practice and be. And that can be really beneficial. And sometimes it doesn't always seem to make sense that would be the person who would know what you need to do. But I guess what I'm wondering about is all those things, all the bringing together stuff, it does come through Rod Stryker's interpretation, his lens of how he presented it to folks. And, I guess I've heard a range of stuff, even setting aside whatever interpersonal relationships that crossed teacher-student boundaries. There's other reports of just abusive context and whatever somatic dominant kind of dynamics between teachers and students. And I'm wondering if that's something you witnessed and experienced as well.
I've thought about that, quite a bit in retrospect as these different stories came out. I would say largely I didn't experience that. I generally saw him doing his best to receive people where they were at, when they were in terms of asking questions. And then he was speaking from a position of authority. And I don't put that all on him. That was sort of the whole arrangement. That's why we were all there, is because we wanted someone to give us some answers. There's a deep human craving for that. And
he had a title. What was it? Yogi Raj? Yoga Rupa or whatever.
It was given to him by his teacher, Pandit Rajmati Tigunai. So it was it's the bargain we all kind of made, is my view at this point. If he had led something that was completely egalitarian and non-hierarchical, it wouldn't have even existed. That was, he was traditional in that manner, and that has its place. It's very. I think there's the primate part of us that likes to have someone admirable guide us. That's a very powerful thing, and it's sort of convenience to not have to completely think for yourself all the time, to be able to trust someone to guide you. And overall, I felt well guided, though. I also have a deep, went through the whole educational system up through college and got my intellect really pumped up. So I always carried some level of skepticism, because that's just part of my
proclivity. You and me, there we go. There's the kindred spirit right there, my friend. Me too.
So it was always I was almost like the anthropologist watching it all happen, even as I was having the experiences. And sometimes I cursed that part of myself. Why can't I just sort of surrender into
why
this
can't I
thing?
surrender over like others? Yeah.
These days, I'm more grateful, I have to say. I think it's all more complicated. So it's good to have some discernment tools.
Yeah. And you said that you sort of had a natural parting of ways before the whole thing went down, right?
Yeah. Because of my own life, mainly having children. And then I found myself drawn more to the Chinese arts of Qigong and Tai Chi, in part after an extended illness in 2016. I found Chinese medicine, and then Qigong particularly seemed to be the thing that really helped me get my sort of nervous system back in order. So I started to pursue that, and that, like, given my very limited practice time, I was just drawn to that instead of, doing some asana or
instead of doing intense kriyas to see if you could elevate your consciousness to some strata or something.
Yeah, that was down the list. In terms
you were
of
just
priorities.
trying to manage and sleep with the baby or whatever.
Yeah, deal with the Trump presidency. There was some other pressing things that were,
Yes, the falling apart of the world. That's a whole other stressor.
Yeah.
But I hear what you say also, and you wrote something about this, which I really appreciated, about how, like, at some point you became fatigued by what, and I'm going to quote you called intellectual gyrations of yoga studies. And I really appreciate that, because I enjoy, like, intellectual inquiry into yoga and text and ideas. And I'm, like, in the middle of doing this training, and we've been doing that for months. But at some point, I feel the same way that I got from reading when you wrote that at some point, it can't just be about doing techniques, that there's something more to it, or there's something like that just sets the stage for something. And that's where I think it starts to go away from, like, technology and tools to rituals. Would you agree with that?
I would.
And when you wrote about technology and tools, you described their characteristics. Would you share some of that stuff here for anybody listening? I thought it was really good stuff about, like, what tools are used for.
Let me see if I can recreate it. I believe I made the point that a tool is something that reliably creates change on whatever it is used upon. So I rely on the tool to always have basically the same effect. That's why.
If I hit the nail with the hammer, it goes into the thing.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
That's the pleasure of tools. I mean, for me, I one of the pleasures of having a house is getting to, like, have a reason for collecting tools. It's a beautiful thing.
And getting the right tool to fulfill that purpose or job.
And there's just nothing like the right drill bit is just
absolutely,
it does it. So yeah, I mean, thank God for tools. But when you apply that metaphor to a human, or to a psyche, or even more broadly, a whole interconnected web of individuals in an environment, it's like complexity theory insists that there's going to be very little linear cause and effect possible. And the context is going to matter tremendously. So something, especially like a yoga technique, is what is the meaning of a particular posture or even a visualization. It's going to be influenced by the whole life you've led up until that point, and your different resonances with the words in it, and then even like the way it was taught to you, how you felt when the technique was given to you. Was it in person? Was it over Zoom? Was it in a book? Like, all of that's going to figure into the outcome.
Absolutely. I was remembering something else I read that you wrote, and I really appreciate it, because I, for a long time now, have been using like this program of practice, this very simple program of breathing and moving forms. And I've basically been using the same program for a long time, on the principle or the idea that in a way, it doesn't matter what forms we use. And you wrote something about how like the repeated ritual of doing a particular practice with an intention over time empowers it. And it's not necessarily some universal metaphysics. And it seems like Rod was teaching, and ParaYoga was very much about like this universal metaphysics. And that if you didn't do it the right way, then you wouldn't necessarily get the Shakti or whatever. I'm curious what you think about that. Like what, and when it comes to form and what actually makes forms useful or do something for us.
Well, you're asking what makes the form useful, if not that it's a tool that reliably gives us the same outcome?
I'm saying that if we're entering into rituals, the use of the forms is not like, oh, I use this warrior 2 to strengthen my thigh in a lunge. Right. And if we're not using form, if we're not using modern postural yoga forms, because a lot of them are that. A lot of them don't go that far back. We know that now, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So if we're using modern postural yoga forms, but we're not thinking of them as technologies to build strength and flexibility or some abstract idea of mindfulness or whatever, but we're thinking of them as rituals, then we have to think about the forms differently, right? The forms aren't to hammer the nail in and make your thigh stronger. The form's for something else that isn't even the doing, right?
What is? Yeah, I think you're asking what are we doing rituals for then?
Okay, yeah, that is it. Then
perhaps.
Then if we're not using forms as tools for self-improvement and strength and flexibility, and we're using forms as ritual, what is the ritualized forms meant to bring about in us?
Yeah. I guess I start from the idea that yoga as it is, modern postural yoga, is already a ritual. But what is that ritual for? Right? We're always doing rituals. We're doing something repeatedly. So it's doing
coffee in the morning ritual. Yeah.
Coffee in the morning ritual, or even brush your teeth, or all these repeated actions. You could argue have a primary mechanical effect, at least in terms of brushing your teeth. But even then, there's a hint of like, I'm doing this to be good. I'm doing this because my dentist told me to. Like, I'm affirming that I'm a responsible person, right? That carries all these other layers.
Mm-hmm.
And so certainly, I mean, I think there's a lot of different answers to what is a yoga class ritual doing, even if it's just implicitly, before we acknowledge it's a ritual, we're rehearsing. I mean, I go back to, Matthew Remsky's work was really a big opening for me and some of this thinking. We're ritually enacting the sovereign individual self at some level. Like we're rehearsing being an individual who controls the body, who is responsible for the body, who even, dominates the body. And that has a history going back into India as well, trying to master the body, sort of the ascetic line that Doug talked about. So given that we're already doing ritual, and it's maybe, I guess it's clearly working for people, right? In that, like, my yoga studios, there's still yoga studios open. Like it's feeding something in people. In some ways, it's just the very deep, basic need to feel your body, come into the present moment. Like, I mean, it's not as fancy as, like, I don't know, worshiping the water gods or supplicating the ancestors, but it's kind of where we have to start. Like, that's what we're starting from, is like ground zero.
I mean, but that's the thing. There's coming into your body so that you can then fine tune the forms and be able to do more in intricate forms, which is a hamster wheel I was on for a while. Was all about being able to do forms, which Iyengar yoga was a lot about, even though people try to make it about other things.
Yeah.
And then there's coming into your body to see how it feels and see if you can actually somatically go into places in your body. Like Angela Farmer came on and she kept saying, go into the body, or whatever.
And maybe there's sort of a healing intention in that, like a healing ritual, right? Like we have to find the shadows, find what is unconscious and make it conscious. That's certainly one of the rituals.
That's in there too. And I guess there's also sort of, I don't know, for me, the process of coming into your body is about listening to something that is contained therein, or the wisdom that is therein.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that the reason I'm kind of talking around it, but the reason why I'm probing you on this is that it does seem to me that this shift that you seem to have had some too, and you felt it necessary to write a thing telling people who might study with you that you were going to make a shift, which I really appreciated. You're like, I'm moving in this new direction. I want you all to know that. And that shift, again, away from it being about the forms or the intellectual gyrations so much. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.